My brother used my credit card without permission. Now he's facing serious legal trouble. It all started about 6 months ago when I received a notification from my credit card company about a large purchase that I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it must be a mistake or maybe a glitch in their system. But when I looked closer at the transaction history, I realized that this wasn't just a one-time thing. There were several purchases that I hadn't made, all adding up to thousands of dollars over the span of a few months. I was completely shocked. I hadn't lost my credit card, and I hadn't given anyone access to it. It didn't take long for the realization to hit me that someone close to me must have used it. I called my bank immediately, but before canceling the card, I wanted to know for sure who was behind this. After some investigation on my own, it became clear. My younger brother had been using my credit card without my permission. I remember the day I confronted him. My hands were shaking, partly out of anger, partly out of disbelief. He was just sitting in the living room when I walked in, trying to act casual. I pulled out my phone, opened the list of transactions, and shoved it in front of him. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. At first, he tried to play dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, not even bothering to look up from his phone. But I wasn't backing down this time. I'd been covering for him for too long, always excusing his behavior because he was family. But this was different. "Don't lie to me," I said, more firmly this time. "I know it's you. I've already checked. Just admit it." His face went pale, and for a second I thought he might actually tell me the truth. But instead, he just got defensive. "Look, I was going to pay you back. It's not that big of a deal. You're overreacting." Overreacting. My own brother had stolen from me, used my credit card without permission, and thought he could just shrug it off like it was nothing. I demanded an explanation, but his reasons were shallow at best. He had gotten into some trouble, needed extra money, and figured that since we were family, I wouldn't mind. I guess he thought I'd just be okay with being his personal bank whenever he ran into problems. What he didn't seem to grasp was that this wasn't just about the money. It was about trust. As angry as I was, part of me didn't want to involve the authorities. He was my brother, after all, and the thought of him facing serious consequences terrified me. But I knew I couldn't just let this slide. He needed to understand the gravity of what he had done. After all, if it had been anyone else, they'd already be facing charges. I gave him a choice: either pay me back in full immediately, or I'd have no choice but to report the fraud to the credit card company, and things could escalate from there. For a brief moment, I thought he might actually take responsibility. But instead, he just stormed out of the room, muttering something about how I was ruining his life, and how I was acting like a stranger, not his family. It wasn't just the money that hurt, it was his complete lack of remorse. Days went by, and despite multiple promises to figure it out, he didn't pay me back. He didn't even try to come up with a plan. It was clear he had no intention of making things right. I felt stuck. If I let him get away with this, what message would that send? That it's okay to steal from family? That there are no consequences for his actions? It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about showing him that actions have consequences, even for family. So after weeks of waiting, I did what I dreaded the most. I called the credit card company and filed a formal dispute for the fraudulent charges. They asked for all the details, and I gave them everything I knew. The investigation process was long, but eventually it became clear that the charges were unauthorized and would be handled as fraud. Things got real when the company informed me that they'd be pursuing legal action against whoever had made the unauthorized transactions. My heart sank. As much as I wanted him to face consequences, I didn't want my brother's life to be ruined by this. But it was out of my hands now. When I told him what was happening, he didn't believe me at first. He thought I was bluffing, trying to scare him into paying me back. But when he started getting calls and letters from the bank's fraud department, reality hit him hard. He showed up at my door, panicked, begging me to do something to stop it. "You can't let this happen. It's not that serious. It's just between us," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. But it wasn't just between us anymore. The bank wasn't going to just drop the case because we were family. Credit card fraud is a serious crime, and they weren't about to let it slide, regardless of the relationship. As much as I hated seeing my brother in that position, I knew there was no undoing what had been set into motion. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. Weeks later, things escalated further. My brother was summoned to court, and the legal trouble he was in became all too real. I tried to offer him advice, told him to get a lawyer, to take this seriously. But the whole situation was weighing on me too. As much as I knew he was in the wrong, I felt guilty. He was my brother, and now his future was uncertain. There was a point where he tried to convince me to drop the charges, but it wasn't that simple. I couldn't just undo what had been done with the bank. It was out of my hands now, and even if I could, would that really teach him anything? How many times had he made bad decisions, only for me or someone else in the family to bail him out? The court proceedings were grueling. I had to testify, recounting everything that had happened. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Sitting there, in front of a judge, telling the truth about what my own brother had done, it made me feel like I was betraying him. But deep down, I knew it wasn't betrayal. It was accountability. As the legal process played out, the reality of the situation hit him harder than ever. He was facing serious charges now, and the possibility of jail time loomed over him. I could see the fear in his eyes, the regret. But it had taken all of this for him to finally realize the magnitude of his actions. There were moments when I wished things could go back to the way they were before all of this, when we were just siblings who fought over small things, who had each other's backs. But I also knew that sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their actions. In the end, the court offered him a plea deal. He avoided jail time, but the punishment was still severe. He had to pay hefty fines, undergo community service, and be on probation for several years. It wasn't the outcome he had hoped for, but it was far better than what could have been. The experience changed both of us. Our relationship isn't the same as it used to be, and I'm not sure if it ever will be. Trust is a fragile thing, and once it's broken, it's hard to repair. But I hope that this was the wake-up call he needed, that it taught him something valuable about trust, responsibility, and family. I still love my brother, and I always will. But love doesn't mean letting someone take advantage of you. It doesn't mean enabling their mistakes. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let them face the consequences of their actions, even if it hurts. As for me, I've learned a lot from this too. I've learned the importance of setting boundaries, even with family, and the importance of protecting myself from those who might take advantage of my kindness. And though the road has been rocky, I hope that one day my brother and I will find a way to rebuild the trust that was lost.